Thanks for joining us, and thanks so much for helping Strange Encounters reach 2,500 subscribers. If you haven't already, make sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive into the unexplained. Your curiosity keeps these stories alive, and there's so much more waiting just beyond the ordinary. Until next time, keep looking up. It was a rainy evening in 1971, somewhere near Turku, Finland. A schoolteacher had just finished her day, weary from lessons and the quiet demands of her classroom. Waiting at her usual bus stop, the cold rain drummed steadily against the asphalt. The roads were familiar to her, roads she had walked countless times. But that night, something utterly unfamiliar was about to appear. A car appeared from the mist. At first glance, it seemed ordinary, a dark, late 1960s European sedan. But as it glided closer, the teacher noticed that there was something almost imperceptibly wrong. It made no engine sound. It produced no vibration from the road. And, most unsettling of all, it seemed to float, hovering a meter or two above the surface. The driver rolled down the window and offered her a ride. Hesitant, she accepted. Inside, the atmosphere was charged with strangeness. Though she could see him clearly, there was a sense of invisible separation, a barrier she could see through, but one she could not touch. The driver himself was a figure of quiet oddity, slender and elegant, with an almost ethereal poise. Dressed in a smooth, silver-gray outfit that caught what little light filtered through the rain-smeared windows. The ride began. The vehicle glided silently along the normally busy road, but that night there was no other traffic. The teacher could feel the unnatural calm settling around her, and she noticed the subtle, surreal hum of the car moving over the wet asphalt, floating yet perfectly steady. Then came the conversation. The driver asked simple questions, but questions that carried a weight of naivety, almost as if he were studying an entirely foreign species. What do teachers do all day, he asked. Why do children attend school? How are lessons organized? Each question was polite, calm, and yet disturbingly clinical, as if she were a subject under observation rather than a passenger on a normal ride home. When the teacher insisted she needed to stop at her usual bus stop, he pressed to continue the conversation. Only when she mentioned her children waiting at home did he relent. And then, without a word, the door opened on its own. She stepped out, shivering, watching the car vanish. Not in the usual way a vehicle drives away, but unnaturally close, sliding silently into the mist and rain, disappearing from sight as if the road had swallowed it whole. Moments later, she felt the lingering effects of the encounter. Hot flashes coursed through her body. A sharp headache throbbed at her temples. Her skin prickled with a sensation of static electricity. She had been part of a brief, calm, but profoundly strange exchange. A window into something utterly beyond normal human experience. There was no spectacle of lights in the sky, no loud roar, no sudden beam, no abduction or dramatic confrontation. Just a quiet, eerie ride. A polite stranger asking questions she had never thought of answering before, and a vehicle that defied the very rules of the world she knew. And then it was gone. Some encounters leave scars or stories of terror. This one left a lingering sense of awe, of curiosity, of a universe that might be stranger and more deliberate than we dare imagine. A car that floated, a figure that studied, a ride that was far more than it seemed. 1971, Finland, and the night that refused to obey the ordinary. In November of 1966, the American Midwest was in the grip of an unusual wave of UFO sightings. Reports were coming in from Michigan, Ohio, Illinois, and Indiana. Police officers described structured craft hovering over highways. Families reported glowing objects pacing their cars. Lights were seen moving in impossible ways over farmland and small towns. It was a time when the subject of unidentified flying objects had not yet settled into the familiar imagery of gray aliens and abduction narratives. The sightings were varied, mechanical, sometimes almost industrial in appearance. And in rural Indiana, just off State Route 52, near the small community of Arlington, a 33-year-old housewife reported something far more unsettling than distant lights in the sky. She claimed she stood in her own home and looked directly into the eyes of someone or something inside a hovering craft no more than 50 feet away. Her name was withheld in the original report. For the sake of the record, she was referred to only as Mrs. Jones. What follows is a reconstruction of her testimony as recorded by investigators. It was sometime between the 5th and 17th of November 1966, around 11:30 at night. My husband and our 3 children were already in bed. I was still up, watching the Johnny Carson show on television. It was quiet, just a normal night. I went into the kitchen to get a drink of water, and when I looked out the window, I saw what I first thought was a helicopter. It was hovering over the electric lines north of the house, maybe half a mile east. It seemed to move slowly along those lines, stopping near each of the 3 homes on our road. At first, I didn't think too much of it, but as it got closer, I realized it could not be a helicopter. There was no sound. It moved slowly, directly above the power lines, and then it approached our house. I tried to wake my husband. I told him there was something weird outside. He mumbled that it would go away, that I must be dreaming. He didn't really understand what I was saying. He never fully woke up. Then it came closer. It hovered about 50 feet from where I was standing. I don't know how high exactly, maybe 2 or 3 stories up. When it stopped there, I could see it clearly. The object looked like a ball with a circular ring around it. There was a hump on the top and another on the bottom. Around the middle, in that ring, were large windows. The dividing parts between the windows were thin, like poles. The color of the object itself looked almost white or silver. Inside, there was a bright white light. Because of that, everything I saw inside looked like a black negative, like silhouettes against brightness. And I saw figures. There were 3 of them. One appeared to be a man. The other 2 seemed to be women. The man was facing me directly. He looked muscular, not heavy but well built, trim. The other 2 were smaller framed. I couldn't see below their waists, but their shapes made me think they were female. They weren't exactly built like our women, but that was the impression I had. The man kept staring at me. That's what disturbed me most. He didn't look away. It seemed like he was looking straight into my eyes. I could make out what I felt were deep-set eyes. I had the strongest feeling that he was trying to do something to me. I thought for a moment that he was trying to hypnotize me. I turned my head, but I kept looking out of the corner of my eyes. It felt like I had looked directly into his eyes for at least 30 seconds before I forced myself to break the stare. I've never forgotten that feeling. It has haunted me ever since. Behind him, it looked like there was some kind of steering wheel or control mechanism. His hand seemed positioned as though he were driving a car. In front of him was a hump-like structure at about waist level, and he appeared to have his hands resting on it. One of the women stood on a slightly higher level. Behind her, it looked like a wall of equipment, what I could only describe as computers, panels or machines covering the upper area. The other woman stood lower, closer to him. At one point, the lower one appeared to hand him something. It looked small, like a cup. The only way I could describe it was like handing someone a cup of coffee. He never seemed to stop what he was doing. All three figures were completely black in outline because of the bright light behind them. I couldn't see any color. I don't remember seeing hair. Their heads and bodies seemed normal in size and proportion. While this was happening, I kept trying to wake my husband. I ran between rooms so I could keep the object in sight. I told him again and again there was something outside. He stayed asleep. The craft began moving again, following the electric lines west. It went toward the next house and hovered there. When it was directly above me, it seemed enormous, as big as a house. It was as tall as it was long. There were no colored lights visible while it hovered, just that bright white glow from the windows. Then suddenly, it changed. It shot upward at a very steep angle. As it did, I saw what looked like a metal tube extend from the back of it, like a tailpipe. From that tube came vapor or exhaust, pink, green, blue, and white. There were also small red, blue, and green lights blinking on it just as it took off. It went straight up into the sky, faster than any jet I had ever seen. My husband had been stationed in Europe with the army. I had watched jets many times before. This was faster, and then it was gone. I couldn't go back to sleep that night. I was very restless, very scared, and I kept wondering if it would come back. The account was investigated by Don Worley, an investigator associated with a civilian UFO research organization active at the time. The report would later appear in a British UFO journal in the early 1970s, preserved as part of the record of the 1966 wave. There are several notable elements in this case. First, the proximity. The witness estimated the craft hovered roughly 50 feet away, close enough to observe structural details, window dividers, interior levels, and humanoid forms. Second, the structure itself. A spherical body with a circular ring of windows suggests a mechanical, engineered craft rather than a vague light or amorphous glow. The description of a wall of computers is particularly interesting given the era. In 1966, computers were large, panel-filled machines with blinking lights, exactly the sort of visuals she describes. Third, the occupants. They were not small beings, not described as frail or child-sized. Instead, they were adult-proportioned, muscular, trim, gendered, at least in her perception. That differs from the smaller entity archetype that would become more common in later decades. The eye contact element stands out as well. Many close encounter reports describe observation. Fewer describe prolonged mutual gaze. She interpreted that stare as hypnotic, though no paralysis, missing time, or physical aftereffects were reported. There were also no reported electromagnetic disturbances, no burned ground, no corroborating statements from neighbors included in the published account. Her husband, notably, did not wake during the event. From a skeptical perspective, one might consider misidentification. A helicopter? Unlikely at 50 feet without sound. Experimental aircraft? None known that matched the structure described. Reflection or visual distortion? Possible, though the movement along power lines and vertical ascent complicate that explanation. Psychological factors must also be considered. The human mind, when confronted with unfamiliar stimuli at night, can fill in details using familiar frameworks: a steering wheel, a cup of coffee, a computer wall. These are domestic and technological analogies drawn from everyday life. Yet the emotional impact she described appears sincere. She did not report being chosen. She did not claim a message. She did not describe abduction. She simply described looking into eyes that did not belong there, and then watching something impossible rise vertically into the night sky and vanish. The 1966 Midwest wave remains one of the most active periods in American UFO history. Hundreds of reports were filed. Most involved lights. Some involved structured craft. A small number involved occupants. This Indiana case sits quietly among them. No photographs, no radar confirmation, no physical trace. Just a woman standing in her kitchen late at night, trying to wake her husband and wondering if what hovered outside her window would find its way back. Whether the experience was a misinterpretation, a psychological episode, or something genuinely unexplained depends largely on the framework one brings to it. What remains undeniable is the clarity with which she remembered it. The structure, the windows, and the eyes staring back. In 1954, in the quiet market town of Tenterden in Kent, a woman encountered something that did not fit comfortably into any category. There were no strange lights in the sky, no mysterious craft hovering over fields, no missing time. Instead, there was a hallway, a landing, and a man who should not have been there. Her name was Maureen Garner. The event took place inside her own home. It was an ordinary day by every account she later gave. She had not been unwell. She had not been upset. She had not been drinking. There had been no emotional shock, no family trauma, no exhaustion. It had been routine, domestic, quiet, predictable. She was walking from her lounge toward the kitchen. As she stepped onto the landing and turned to close the lounge door with her left hand, she faced forward again, and her path was blocked. Standing directly in front of her was a man. He had not walked up the stairs. He had not come through the front door. He had not been heard. He was simply there. What makes this account particularly unusual is not just the presence of the figure, but her reaction to him. She was not afraid. Under normal circumstances, she described herself as easily startled. Even her husband quietly entering a room could make her jump. Yet here, faced with a tall stranger standing inches away inside her home, she felt none of that panic. She was surprised, but she was calm. The first thing that struck her was his height. Maureen Garner was nearly 6 feet tall. She was accustomed to looking most men in the eye, but this figure towered over her. She estimated he stood well over 7 feet in height. She had to tilt her head back to look up at him. He was proportionate, not distorted, not monstrous, clearly male in form, broad-shouldered, upright, balanced. He wore a one-piece suit of metallic blue. It was not shiny like polished steel. It was not reflective like chrome. It had the appearance of soft fabric, something like nylon, yet it glimmered faintly as though carrying its own subdued light. There were no seams, no zippers, no buttons, no belt, no visible fastenings of any kind. The material fitted smoothly around his neck and waist. It did not wrinkle, it did not crease. It seemed almost molded to him. Covering his head was a tight-fitting helmet, transparent in appearance, like a clear plexiglass dome. It enclosed his cranium completely, concealing his ears. No hair was visible beneath it. But it was his face that stayed with her. Even 15 years later, when she spoke publicly about the incident in 1969, she said she could recall him as clearly as the day she saw him. His forehead was very high and broad. His cheekbones were heavy beneath the skin, but not protruding sharply. His jawline did not show in the way a human jaw normally does. From below the eyes downward, his face tapered into a blunt-ended triangular shape. His mouth was little more than a horizontal slit. The lips did not protrude outward. They appeared almost turned inward, giving the lower half of his face a strangely immobile quality. Below the eyes down to the chin, the skin did not move at all. There were no wrinkles, no visible facial lines, no eyebrows. His eyes were large and deep blue, not glowing, not luminous, just intensely blue. She found herself compelled to look into them. They moved slightly, only the eyeballs shifting, and she could see the reflection of the landing window in them, as if she were looking into real, physical eyes catching light, physical light. He did not speak. He did not raise his hands. He did not lean forward. He did not step back. He stood with his arms at his sides, completely still. At one point, her right arm was only about 3 inches from his left elbow, close enough that she could judge his solidity, close enough that she felt certain he was not transparent, not a projection, not some vague shape. He appeared as solid as any living person. The entire encounter lasted perhaps 30 seconds. There was no message delivered, no gesture made, no sound uttered. She later said that if he was attempting to communicate something, she did not know what it was. And then, without warning, he was gone. There was no fading, no flash of light, no mist, no distortion. 1 second he was there, the next second he was not. The space he had occupied was simply empty again. She did not lose consciousness. She did not fall. She did not feel weak. She did not report missing time. She continued into the kitchen as though the moment had folded in on itself and passed. When later questioned about whether she believed he had been physically present in the flesh, she answered yes. She could not see through him. He cast no strange glow. He stood like a man would stand, and yet he had not entered, and he had not left. The encounter predates much of the popular imagery associated with so-called Nordic-type beings that would become widespread in the 1960s and 70s. In 1954, such descriptions were not common in British media. The seamless metallic garment, the high forehead, the unusual jawline, these details emerged independently of later cultural reinforcement. At the same time, the figure does not neatly match the later gray archetype. He was not small. His skin was pink, not gray. His eyes, though large, were proportionate and clearly human-like in structure. The immobility of the lower face is perhaps the most unsettling detail. It suggests either an anatomy slightly different from ours or a being unused to human expression. There are, of course, possible explanations: a walking hallucination, a brief dissociative episode, an internally generated image with extraordinary realism. Yet the reflection in the eyes, the measured distance between their bodies, the calm clarity of her recall, these details complicate simple dismissal. What makes this case endure is its restraint. There was no drama, no abduction, no prophecy, just a silent visitor standing in a narrow English hallway, watching, and then gone. Encounters like this exist in a strange borderland between folklore and ufology, between apparition and extraterrestrial hypothesis. They resist categorization. Was this an entity crossing briefly into our physical space? A psychological anomaly manifesting with impossible detail, or something else entirely, something that stands in the quiet spaces of ordinary homes, seen only once, remembered forever. In 1954, in a modest house in Tenterden, a woman walked from her lounge toward the kitchen. For half a minute, she shared that space with something she could not explain, and then she was alone again. In the dead of winter, on a frozen Swedish lake, one man's life was about to change forever. What he experienced that day would leave doctors baffled and leave the world questioning what truly exists beyond our eyes. Sweden in the mid-1960s was a nation of forests, lakes, and long winter nights. Just 2 decades after the Second World War, Swedes were experiencing rapid growth. Modern life was settling in, yet despite the technical progress and rising prosperity, age-old questions about the unknown still captivated the imagination. In this era of Cold War tension and technological leaps into space, reports of strange lights and unexplained objects in the skies were no rarity. In decades past, Swedes had reported mysterious flying objects, from the so-called ghost rockets of 1946 to various unexplained sightings through the 1950s and into the 1960s, feeding both curiosity and debate among the public and scientists alike. Yet, for most people in Sweden at that time, the subject of extraterrestrial contact remained a fringe curiosity, a topic for newspapers' oddball columns and late-night conversations, not something woven into everyday life. UFO reports were documented, debated, memorized by small circles of enthusiasts, and in some communities, even laughed about. The formation of UFO Sweden, a national organization dedicated to collecting sightings and studying reports, was still a few years in the future. But the threads of Sweden's UFO narrative were forming, rooted in decades of intriguing, unexplained cases and a restless fascination with what lay beyond the visible skies. It was into this atmosphere that Richard Höglund, a down-to-earth man by any measure, found himself at the center of one of the most extraordinary claims in Swedish UFO lore. Born in 1913 and working as a rock blaster and construction laborer, Richard lived quietly with his wife just outside the small town of Uddevalla on Sweden's west coast. He was not immersed in esoteric or fringe circles. He was practical, hard-working, grounded. The kind of man who believed in measured facts, not fairy tales. Yet, on the 9th of December, 1965, his life would intersect with something utterly impossible. On that bitter winter afternoon, Richard felt an inexplicable impulse, a tug at his instincts that he could not ignore. His dog, usually calm and predictable, seemed restless as they ventured out onto the frozen expanse of Grindhusen Lake. Then, above the thin gray sky, a whining hum grew steadily louder. Richard looked up, and there it was, a disc-shaped craft, levitating just above the ice, semi-transparent and shimmering in the winter light. From beneath the craft extended a dark tubular structure. Slowly, 4 figures, 3 male, 1 female, drifted downward, almost as though gravity held no sway over them. They were human in shape, yet unlike anything Richard had ever seen. Hairless skin, large dark eyes, and translucent suits that glowed softly against the icy lake. Rather than recoil, Richard stood rooted by a mix of astonishment and a calm curiosity. There were no words, no speech, just a silent communication of gestures and shared awareness. One of the beings approached and pressed a small, cylindrical device against his back. At that moment, a warm vibration spread through him, and the kidney pain that had troubled Richard for years, pain bad enough to require surgery, suddenly vanished. For nearly an hour, the encounter unfolded in silence and stillness. Then, as evening settled and the craft's glow shifted from blue to a brighter orange, the four beings drifted upward and entered their craft. With a silent surge of speed, it vanished into the darkening sky. The next day, Richard walked into the local hospital. Doctors were puzzled when X-rays failed to reveal the kidney stone he had come in to have removed. A genuine medical mystery that left even physicians scratching their heads. News of Richard's experience did not sweep headline pages or provoke national controversy. There were no official acknowledgments, no government investigations, no swarms of journalists camped outside his door. In small communities, whispers spread, some skeptical, some intrigued. Yet the story remained largely confined to local circles, archived reports, and the notebooks of dedicated researchers. It was not until years later that Swedish UFO investigator Håkan Blomqvist, who would go on to help found the Archive for UFO Research and become one of the most serious chroniclers of unexplained events in Scandinavia, began documenting Richard's story alongside other UFO contact accounts in Sweden. Today, Richard Hoogland's first encounter is not a household name, even among enthusiasts. Yet, for those who study the tapestry of unexplained encounters, it stands out as one of the most unusual, a case where the everyday intersected with the inexplicable, and where a practical man met something utterly beyond the known world. On a silent, frozen lake in Sweden, Richard would find himself face to face with a mystery that defied explanation, a moment that would mark the beginning of a story he would carry with him for the rest of his life. Richard Hoogland's first encounter was only the beginning. In our next episode, we'll explore what happened next, an even stranger and more astonishing series of events that would challenge everything he thought he knew. Thanks for joining us, and thanks so much for helping Strange Encounters reach 2,500 subscribers. If you haven't already, make sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive into the unexplained. Your curiosity keeps these stories alive, and there's so much more waiting just beyond the ordinary. Until next time, keep looking up.